Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast. We cover everything Major League, from spring training to the World Series. We've got your favorite club covered, from New York to Boston to LA. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Ridenauer, and we have another fantastic episode ahead of all of us today. A really, really good one. A lot of really good things going on in the baseball world. We are inching our way closer and closer to October, and I don't know about anyone else, but I love postseason baseball. I think it's a very underrated playoff sport that people don't give enough credit to. It's intense watching a Game 6 or 7 down-to-the-wire game. There isn't anything quite like it in the fall time. Like I said, we have a big show ahead of us today, so I'll dive right into what we have going on today. And first, I'll get into the usual game recaps, these coming from the games on Friday, September 18th, and give some late season standings updates, who is where in the playoff picture and things along those lines. Afterwards, I will discuss which players I feel have been the most improved this season. A number of star players made this list mainly because of their poor starts to the season, but they have slowly started to pick things up and are playing much better as of late. Later, I will discuss which teams I think are going to be the most dangerous in the playoffs and which teams I think could really make some noise this postseason. And be sure to stay here for the final few minutes of the show today, as I will dive into the age-old question of whether or not the great Pete Rose should be in the Hall of Fame or not, a very hot topic in baseball for many years, and really that is still very popular today, so we'll get into that later on. But I'm going to dive into some game recaps from Friday, September 18th. A lot of great games going around the league. First one I'll talk about, Brewers-Royals. Brewers taking this one 9-5, and Kansas City jumped out ahead of Milwaukee early on, scoring 3 runs in the first and 1 in the third, and then Milwaukee put up 6 runs in the bottom of the fourth and 3 in the bottom of the fifth. Kansas City was only able to tack on 1 more run after that in the top of the ninth, but Jacob Nottingham from Milwaukee hitting a huge grand slam in that bottom fourth frame, which was really big. Christian Yelich having a very historic milestone. A couple of historic milestones happened actually on Friday. One of them coming from Christian Yelich hitting his 150th career home run, so congratulations to Christian Yelich. A very big feat. Many more home runs to go for his young career, really. Orlando Arcia also had a 3-run home run as well. So a lot of power hitting out of Milwaukee last night, and they're right now, in kind of the big time on the outside looking in picture, and the clock is against them, and so time is ticking. They've got to react. They've got to do something, because we are approaching under 7-8 games left, if that. And I mean, at that point, you got to play basically perfect baseball and hope and pray that somebody ahead of you is going to slip up. I know that the Reds and the Cardinals are both ahead of Milwaukee in the NL Central. So, I mean, if they want to find any sort of room in the playoffs, they're going to have to hope for the wild card, and they're going to have to hope that, somebody is going to slip up. I mean, right now in the wild card situation, it's looking, pretty tight. I mean, it's Cincinnati and Philadelphia. Cincinnati having that last spot, and Milwaukee is 2 spots away from Cincinnati. They still would have to leapfrog over San Francisco, so they still have a little bit of ground to make up. But if they can, play the way they've played a couple games, they've had an 18-run game in the last week or two. They've had a 19-run game a couple, games ago against the Tigers. So they're capable of playing really good baseball. It's just whether or not they're going to, turn it up at the right time, and if they're not going, to, it might be too late, and it might be, past the point of no return for Milwaukee. So we'll have to see how their season plays out. Next game, or I should say next 2 games, as it was a doubleheader. First game, Cardinals-Pirates. Cardinals taking this one 6-5. St. Louis scoring the first run on the top of the first, and then Pittsburgh tacking on 2 runs in the bottom of the first. But then St. Louis would score 2 runs in the second, 2 in the third, and then 1 in the fourth, while Pittsburgh was able to put up 3 in the bottom of the fourth. But that was it. That was all she wrote for Pittsburgh, and St. Louis was able to get their 23rd win of the year, 6-5 over the Pirates. pretty solid stuff out of St. Louis. I mean, you obviously, have to be a little bit worried if you're just, winning one run ball games against a team like the Pirates. But, I mean, it's a good sign that, guys like Colton Wong, he had a leadoff homer, which is always really great. Tyler O'Neill, he had a huge, couple homers, just one homer, but he also had some really nice plays out in the outfield. So, I mean, showing his versatility as both a fielder and a hitter. So this Cardinals team, if they continue to play the way that they've been playing and they're able to stay in their, rightful playoff position, I mean, this is going to be a very interesting team to watch in the playoffs because I don't think that they're, the typical St. Louis Cardinals playoffs team that we've seen in many years before. But I do think that there'll still be, some sort of glimmer of hope for them because it's the Cardinals. And no matter what, they always find themselves in some sort of, winning situation or winning scenario at least. So we'll have to see, moving forward how the Cardinals are able to carry out the rest of the season. And the next game, they actually, continued on their winning ways against the Pirates, winning the second of two games in the doubleheader, 7-2 over the Pirates. And it was a 6-run bottom six inning that proved to be the difference maker. St. Louis scored 1 run in the bottom of the fourth, but Pittsburgh went up 2-1 after the fifth inning. So going into the sixth inning, it was a 2-1 ball game, and 6 runs in the bottom of the sixth inning. I mean, that's going to be the biggest difference maker right there. So, I mean, huge win out of St. Louis. Would have been really, really, really bad if they were to have dropped or had gone 1-1 against the Pirates in that doubleheader because teams like the Pirates, the Royals, you shouldn't be losing series against them. You shouldn't be losing the 2 of 3 or 3 of 4 against teams like that, especially at this point of the season where every single win matters the most. And if you're looking to get into the playoffs, and if you're trying to make a playoffs run like the Cardinals, like the Brewers, games like these that they just played on Friday, they can't afford to lose those games. So getting into the next games, again, another doubleheader matchup, this one coming against the Phillies and the Blue Jays. Phillies winning the first game 7-0, blanking the Blue Jays. Bryce Harper hit a 2-run home run. He's been playing out of his mind, had a 3-for-3 day from the plate in that first game. Really, I mean, Bryce Harper, I don't know why people aren't paying a little bit more attention to him. He's been playing out of his mind all year long. I mean, he's been playing really, really good baseball. And I didn't even know, probably up until about a month ago, a month into the season, I had no idea what he was doing. And I looked at his stats, and I mean, it's staggering. I mean, right now he's hitting 253. He's got a 925 OPS still. So the average has dropped down from, I think at one point it was up to close to 350. But again, it's dropped down a little bit. It's kind of plateaued, but he still has a lot of pop in his bat. He's still a very, very good hitter. Still a very good player. And the second of 2 games, Phillies also won against the Blue Jays. This one a little bit of a closer one, 8-7. Bryce Harper going 3-for-3 in this one, like I mentioned. But it was a 1-run score by the Phillies in the bottom of the first, so they scored the first run of the game, and then they scored another one in the third. But Toronto put up 5 in the top of the fourth. So going into the bottom fourth inning, they're up 5-2, and then Philadelphia was able to tie it up in that bottom 4 inning, 5-5. Toronto tacked on 2 more runs in the top of the fifth, and then Philadelphia added 3 runs in the bottom of the sixth that proved to be the difference maker in that one. I mean, a lot of back and forth baseball there. And the Blue Jays now moving to 26-25. Phillies are 26-25 also. So, very interesting, kind of situation we have over in the the NL because, the Phillies, they're right at that 7 spot, 26-25. They've got the Reds right on their heels. They're nipping at them. And Cardinals are, not too far ahead of the Phillies in that, the Cardinals have that 6th spot right now. So things are getting very tight in that 6, 7, 8 spot in the NL, and same thing in the AL. I mean, now a little bit different though because the Indians are in such a good division that, their 28-23 record kind of stands out from, their other wild card counterpart in Toronto who has a 26-25 record. So obviously, a little bit, different in the terms of, how good that one division is over the other, but still playoff picture is getting very interesting, and things are starting to heat up. Next game, actually I should say next doubleheader because this is the 3rd straight doubleheader. Nationals-Marlins. Nationals winning the first of 2, 5-0, scoring 2 in the second and 3 in the fourth. I mean, although the Nationals are completely out of it, it's a great sign that, this Nationals team could potentially be, maybe a disruptor for some of these, playoff contending teams like the Marlins, now they are, after that loss, they were 25-24, while the Nationals moved to 19-29. And I got to give my credit to the Marlins. I mean, they've continued to play very well, and I think a lot of people, including myself, figured that they were just going to peter off at some point. They were going to, at some point fall off the wagon a little bit, and they weren't going to, continue to find themselves in a playoff picture. Now, I think that if we had a normal season, 162 games, I believe that would probably be a little bit of a different case, a little bit of a different situation, but still, that's not this year. That's, this year's a very unique situation, and the Marlins are, right there in the playoff mix. I mean, they are literally in the playoff picture. Next of 2 games in the doubleheader, Marlins completely demolishing the Nationals, 14-3. And, I mean, this was a huge win by Miami. I'm scoring 14 runs in 7 innings. That's insane. They put up 4 or more runs in the 3rd, the 5th, and the 6th inning. And they scored 1 in the 1st and 1 in the 2nd. Brian Anderson had 3 home runs on the day. 3. Brian Anderson's been playing pretty solid this year, I'd have to say. Chad Wallach had an RBI double for the Marlins as well. I mean, that's a great sign that, guys like Brian Anderson, Jesus Aguilar has been hitting very well. Miguel Rojas has been hitting very well all year long, even though he hasn't seen as much action as some of the other guys have. But still, I mean, they've got some pieces where, and obviously they added Starling Marte during the trade deadline. They've got some pieces that could, potentially, I don't want to say that they'd win a series, but they could force, maybe a pivotal Game 5 or a pivotal Game 7 situation against whomever they might play against. I don't think that they'll win a series, but if they do, that wouldn't be completely shocking. I mean, I would be somewhat shocked, but, the Marlins, I mean, they've done everything and more this year, and I have to give them a lot of credit. I mean, a team that doesn't have, some staggeringly good baseball player that's sticking out amongst the rest of them. I mean, if you want to say Starling Marte, but, on any other team, I feel like he would just be kind of any other, any old good baseball player, nothing crazy, nothing special, but he is a very good baseball player. But again, they don't have somebody like, a Mike Trout or a Christian Yelich or a Charlie Blackmon or, a Nick Castellanos or a Javi Baez. They don't have players like that on their team. But they've got, guys that have been very consistent and have been playing well. And, Jesus Aguilar, I have to give him a lot of credit. He had a pretty poor year last year, but he's been playing much better this year. So, that might be able to help them and be a big difference for them come October. Next game, a very close one, a 1-0 decision, Indians-Tigers. Indians winning this one. And Zach Plesac, I mean, he threw an unbelievable game, got the win, 4-2 on the year, 1.85 ERA. He actually threw an immaculate inning. And for anyone out there who does not know what an immaculate inning is, basically where every pitch you throw is a strike. So you basically throw, 9 strikes. And it's something that is very challenging to do. But, congratulations to Zach Plesac. Again, a very historic night on Friday in baseball. Indians only scoring that 1 run in the 5th inning. Francisco Lindor actually is the reason why. He had a sac fly RBI in that case. So, very close game. And if you're the Indians, you obviously don't want to see yourself dropping to the Tigers at this point of the season. But still only scoring 1 run, that should be, I don't want to say cause of concern, but you can't expect to go into the playoffs and win ball games 1-0 this year. That's just not going to happen, especially with the talent pool and with the teams that are in the playoff picture right now. I mean, if you were to look at the playoff picture right now, if the season were to end today, the Indians would be playing the White Sox. So it would be an AL Central matchup, and those two teams have gone at it the entire year. And the White Sox are really good. I mean, they are very, very good. So, I mean, and there would be no way that the Indians would expect themselves to win a ball game against the White Sox 1-0, because I can tell you right now that even if it's Zach Plesac or Shane Bieber or whoever it is on the mound for the Indians, Jose Abreu, Eloy Jimenez, they're going to do damage. They're going to do something. I mean, Luis Robert, too. I mean, they're going to get on base, and they're going to be a productive offensive team. So if you're the Indians and you're going to want to win games, you can't have your offense struggle, really at any point, because a 1-0 ball game, in my personal opinion, is just not going to get the job done in this postseason this year. Next game, a huge routing. Mets, Braves winning this one 15-2. And Atlanta was, again, very spread out all over the entire game. 1 run in the first, 4 in the second, 1 in the third, 6 in the fourth, 2 in the sixth, and then 1 in the eighth. So, again, a lot of offense and a lot of different spots for the Braves. They moved to 30-21 while the Mets fall to 23-28. Atlanta, and I don't want to say that they're going to make a huge run because I feel like they're going to be typical Atlanta. They'll start off really hot, maybe the first 2 games, and then they'll fizzle out throughout the rest of the series in the playoffs. I mean, Ozzie Albies, he had a multi-homer game against the Mets, so, good sign of him getting the bat going and being, very, productive from the plate. They've got a lot of great hitting. The hitting across the board has been really, really good. Nick Markakis is still getting it done. He's only hitting .259, but, having him at the bottom of your lineup, and he's hitting .259, and, against the Mets, he was 2 for 5. So he's still producing at the 8th spot in your lineup. Again, that's huge. That's huge to have if you're the Braves moving forward. That depth, again, that's really good. Freeman has completely turned his season around. We're going to hear about Freddie Freeman in a couple segments here on this episode, batting .359. He's got a 1.128 OPS, so he's been hitting out of his mind lately. Really great turnaround of a season for Freddie Freeman. Kind of started off really slow, and then he was able to pick it up. But this Braves team, they're going to be dangerous going into the playoffs. I don't think they'll be as dangerous as some of the other teams that I'll mention later on in the show in my most dangerous teams for the playoffs segment, but I do think that they're still a team to watch, and I do think that they're a team that can swing either way. They can either get swept in 4 games or 3 games, or they can, win, the first 2 series and then wind up, find themselves in the NLCS or even the World Series. They're a team that can go there, either way. They have the capabilities of going that far, but they also have, the track record of, fizzling out after the first round. So, again, it'll be fascinating to see how that unfolds for the Braves. Next game, Reds, White Sox. And if you're the White Sox, this is not a great sign. Reds winning 7-1 over the White Sox. Cincinnati scored 5 runs in the third, 1 in the first, and then 1 in the seventh. Again, you shouldn't be worried if you're the White Sox, but you shouldn't be happy about that, especially if you're losing to a team that is, really fighting for its playoff chances. Obviously the White Sox have clinched. They're probably not as worried. Jesse Winker had a huge home run, and he's been out of his mind playing baseball this year. Jesse Winker has been a really big bright spot for Cincinnati, mainly because of the universal DH. That has been a change in a rule that has paid dividends for a lot of guys, and Winker is one of them. Same thing with, Marcell Ozuna with the Braves. Same thing. He's got 40-plus RBIs this year, and in an otherwise, season where he would be, having to be in the field, and it probably would, tire him out. Now he gets to, take a rest, take a load off, but still have the bat in the lineup and still actually, play on a daily basis. So that's what, and honestly, and going back to, my last episode that I did talking about what rules could, potentially stick around, I definitely could see that universal DH thing. I really do, because a lot of guys benefit from it. I think that it gives, pitchers a little bit of rest. They don't have to obviously, dress and be in the lineup or be in the batting lineup and have to go up and, swing a bat and potentially injure themselves running down first base or, a ball that, they get hit from a pitch, whatever it might be. I think that it's going to, do a lot of wonders for the game of baseball. So I'm excited to see if that rule will stick around. But great win by the Reds. But again, if you're the White Sox, you don't want to have that, become a trend the last week of the season going into the postseason. You don't want to, drop 5 of 6 or, 6 of 7 or whatever it might be. So next game, Yankees, Red Sox, a typical great rivalry. Yankees winning this one, final in 12, actually. Yankees winning 6-5, and, scoreless through the first 3 innings. And then Boston put up 3 runs in the bottom 4, then they put up 1 in the bottom 5th. But then the Yankees, they went on a tear, scored 2 in the 7th, 1 in the 8th, 1 in the 9th. They were able to force extras. It was scoreless in the 10th. Both teams attacked on a run each in the 11th. And then the top of the 12th was the go-ahead deciding run by the Yankees. DJ LeMahieu hit the go-ahead double that scored that run. Again, the Yankees are 30-21. They've been able to turn it around. I think, everybody was, really questioning them a couple weeks ago when they went, an even 500, and now they're 9 games above 500. But we can't discount the Yankees, right? You can't discount them. They're just that good. But I will say, you still have to, understand that, the Jays, the Rays. I mean, they're two very formidable opponents in the AL East that, have been given everything and more to the Yankees and really everybody in that division. And, I mean, the Red Sox have been bad all year long, and the Orioles have been up and down, but they've really fallen by the wayside. So, I think that the Rays and the Jays should be taken a little bit more seriously, especially the Rays. I mean, they're really good. The Rays are a very, very good baseball team. Gary Sanchez had the game-tying home run. Great to have his bat back, in the lineup and getting him going a little bit, because he has been struggling mightily all year long. I mean, he's really, really, really struggled hard. So, good. Hopefully he can, be productive and have, the hitting prowess that he is capable of in the playoffs for this Yankees team, because it's going to be needed, because, with the way that they have as their track record with injuries, guys that have been injured, it is not a far-fetched idea of somebody on this team getting an injury in the middle of the playoffs, or, going down with a little 10-day, thumb sprain or an ankle sprain or whatever, whether it's Judge or Urshela or Stanton or whatever. Having Gary Sanchez there to potentially pick up the slack a little bit, that's a great sign, especially for the Yankees. So moving into the next game, Rays and Orioles. Rays winning 2-1 in a very, very close one. Tyler Glasnow, I mean, he pitched a gem of a game, struck out 10 Orioles. He's a 4-1 on the year now, 4.21 ERA. And honestly, I don't think that ERA reflects his ability as a pitcher very well. I think that he's a way better than a 4 ERA pitcher. I think that he's a solid 3 ERA guy, and I mean, he's a very, very talented baseball player, and he showed it last year when he came over from the Pirates. He came, storming out of the gates for the Rays in the first 7 games that he pitched. But again, had a little bit of a struggle earlier on in the year, but he's been able to find his groove. Alex Cobb has really struggled for the Orioles. I mean, he's 1-5 on the year, 4.76 ERA. He got the loss on a Friday. But, Rays scoring the first run in the first inning and then 1 run in the third. Baltimore was only able to add 1 in the bottom of the 4th, and that was really it. Brandon Lowe had an RBI single that drove in one of those runs. Nate Lowe also drove in a run on an RBI single. So, no huge hits, no power hits, no extra base hits or anything like that, but still getting guys on base, moving them over and driving them in. And that's what the Rays are really good at, and they've shown it. And they've, even in a close ball game, they can still come out, with a win somehow, some way. So moving into the next game, Diamondbacks, Astros. Diamondbacks winning this one 6-3. Houston scoring the first run in the first inning and then 1 in the third. Arizona put up 3 runs in the 4th, and then Houston answered with 1 in the 5th, but then it was 2 in the 7th and 1 in the 8th by Arizona that, proved to seal the deal for the Diamondbacks. Astros moved to 25-26 on the year. So again, although they aren't, I don't know what to think of this Astros team. I really don't, because one minute I'm like, okay, they could be all right, because at one point or another they were 24-18. They were 6 games above 500. And I was like, okay, maybe they're actually going to be the team of old, and maybe they're going to actually, make a serious run at the playoffs. I look at the schedule, or I look at their record, 2 weeks later or whatever it was, and all of a sudden, they're 24-24. And I'm kind of like, okay, well, this team is very hot or cold, very hit or miss, but I just don't know what to think of them. I think it's very clear that the off-season, allegations and that whole cheating scandal has definitely, in some way or another, affected them. I mean, I think, you can't say it hasn't, because it's clear that a lot of the guys who were hitting very well last year before all this came out are not hitting well at all this year. Not even in the slightest. Bregman's not. Altuve's not. Carrera leads their team in hitting. And I mean, he's been hitting well all year long. And, Michael Brantley, I mean, he's been up and down. He's, been a leader in hitting for them also this season. But, I mean, the guys that were usually doing a lot of damage, I mean, not so much, and it makes you really wonder. And I know I've said that before on the show, and I feel like a broken record, but it really makes you wonder. But again, good win by the Diamondbacks. Astros, again, moved to 25-26, and the Diamondbacks are now 20-32. Next game, another huge double-digit win, and or I shouldn't say a double-digit win because it was a 9-run difference, but double-digit runs scored. Dodgers, Rockies. Dodgers winning 15-6. Dodgers, it was a heavy-hitting second inning. I mean, 4 runs scored by the Dodgers, 3 runs scored by the Rockies, but then 5 runs scored by the Dodgers in the 5th inning, 2 in the 6th, and then 4 in the 7th. Colorado did put up 3 in the 6th, so some very loaded, bottom half-inning frames by these teams. Again, showing that offensive power that is in that NL West. Dodgers are now 37-15. They are very close to 40 wins, and I would not be shocked if they got to 40 wins. Mookie Betts hit his 16th home run on the year. Gavin Lux also had a huge 453-foot home run. Cody Bellinger had a 2-run home run. Cody Bellinger, all of a sudden, the bat has woken up. I can't believe I'm saying it, but I'm saying it. Again, he's been hitting under 230 for the entire year pretty much. Really been struggling, but again, it speaks volume to that depth in that team. I mean, Corey Seager has picked up the slack. Mookie Betts has picked up the slack. Will Smith, their rookie catcher, has been playing so much better as of late. They are so deep that even if one of their star guys goes down or if one of their star guys is struggling or slumping, somebody else is just going to fill that void in and just step right up to the plate and do exactly what that guy who's slumping is capable of doing. So that is the danger of this Dodgers team. And again, we're going to hear about them later on in the show. This is a team that everybody should keep an eye on because they are going to make a lot of noise in this playoffs. So the next game, Twins, Cubs. Cubs winning in this one 1-0 over the Twins. The only run scored in the bottom first inning. Great pitching job by Kyle Hendricks. Jeremy Jeffries also came in and did a nice job relieving. Hendricks picked up the win, 6-4 on the year for him, 2.93 ERA. Wilson Contreras drove in the lone run of the evening, an RBI single. So again, good thing that Wilson Contreras is getting the bat going a little bit. This is a Cubs team that hasn't really had a whole bunch of offensive help, I would say, but somehow, some way, they still find themselves in that 30-win margin, 31-20 now. And again, probably a lot has to do with how their division is. Not a very good division, so the competition hasn't been great, which does make you wonder, are they going to be ready to play in the playoffs? But I do think that we haven't heard a whole lot about them, and they have the experience, and they've got a very strong core, tight-knit group of guys on that team that have been around since the World Series win in 2016. They've been around during other playoff runs in the recent years. So this team has built good chemistry, and they've got a great foundation. And if they're able to have help from Chris Bryant and Javi Baez and Wilson Contreras, and those bats start really picking up the pace a little bit here in October, this is a dangerous Cubs team. I mean, this is a team that I think people forget about sometimes for quite frankly, not quite sure why, because they are still a very good baseball team. So we'll have to see how the Cubs are going to hold their own in the playoffs, and if they can actually go toe-to-toe with some other sizable opponents, and not just the run-of-the-mill teams that they go up against in the NL Central. So next game, Rangers-Angels. Angels winning this one 6-2. First run was scored in the bottom second by the Angels, and then they added on another run in the 5th, the 6th, the 7th, and the 8th. They put up 2 runs in the 8th, and then the Rangers only put up 2 runs in the 7th. That was pretty much it. But Albert Pujols, I have to take a second on this, because Albert Pujols just hit his 661st career home run past Willie Mays. He sits alone at 5th all-time in career home runs. So congratulations to Albert Pujols. Continues to have a very historic, monumental, not only season, but career. Will definitely go down as one of the greatest hitters of all time. My personal opinion, the greatest hitter since 2000, hands down. I mean, you could probably make a case for Miguel Cabrera, obviously, but I think that Albert Pujols is the best hitter since 2000. He is that good. And he's obviously shown it. And he's a guy that's played the game honestly his entire career. And I think that's why, for me personally, I respect him all the more, is because he's played it honestly. He has not cheated. There's never been any sort of, steroid allegations against him. He's played the game honestly, and he's always played it, and he's given all the respect in the world to the game. So I have to give, tip my hat and give my credit over to Albert Pujols. Congratulations. Huge accomplishment for him. Next game, Padres-Mariners. Padres winning 6-1. Really good win by the Padres. Again, they don't want to have themselves slipping against these teams that are, 7-8 games under 500 before the postseason. Would not be a great sign and not a great, momentum builder to go into the postseason with. Manny Machado hit 2 home runs on the night. He's been playing way better. I mean, he's one of the most improved players the entire season. I mean, he was hitting under 200 for the first half of the season, and now he leads the team in batting average. And that's the team that's got Fernando Tatis, Will Myers, and Jake Cronenworth, and not to mention Austin Nola and Mitch Moreland. So the fact that Manny Machado, again, everybody looks at Fernando Tatis, but I think it's Manny Machado that's going to be the huge difference maker for them in the playoffs. Great win by the Padres. They moved to 33-19, while the Mariners are 22-29. Next game, and the final game of the evening, Giants Athletics. Athletics winning this one 6-0. They continue their domination over in the West. They scored the first run in the first inning, 3 in the third, and then 2 in the fourth. I mean, great job by the A's. And again, the reason why this A's team is so good is because they've got great power hitting, although not a lot of their power hitters hit for a great average. But again, they hit for a great OPS, and as time goes on, that's going to be a stat that is looked at much more severely than, say, batting averages. Matt Olson had a 3-run homer, one of those big-time, power hitters on this team. And they actually, with this win, they clinched the playoff berth. So third straight year going into the playoffs for the A's. Congratulations to them. Now going to be, instead of a wild card team, going to be actually the division champion, and rightfully so. They played much better than every team in their division all year long, and they deserve that all the more. And I'm very excited to see them play in the playoffs this upcoming October. So that'll do it for us in this first segment. But stay right there, folks, because after the commercial, I will get into my most improved players for this season and which superstars might have started the season slow, but were able to pick up the playing recently and have much better, and have been able to have a much better, and I mean a much better season. Folks, stay right there. We'll be right back here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA, to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Jack Ridenauer with you all, and in our first segment, I got things rolling discussing the game recaps from Friday, September 18th. Things are starting to get very interesting in the MLB. A lot of really good games that evening, and with some playoff races starting to heat up as we get closer to October, this season's going to have a very interesting finish to it. Be sure to stick around for the final few minutes of the show today, as I will discuss one of the more popular topics in baseball, whether or not Pete Rose should be in the Hall of Fame. A really good discussion, so stick around for that one later on in the show. I want to now get into some of the most improved players this year and which players have really turned their season around, and in a matter of weeks at that. And a couple of these names you're going to be shocked at because, they're usually star-studded players and players that we hear quite a bit about. And so, it's going to be a little alarming at first when I mention some of these guys, but some of these players, they really had a tough first couple weeks, tough first couple games at that. So the first guy I want to mention from the Chicago White Sox, Tim Anderson. He's the reigning batting champion in the AL, had a rough first few games of the season. His average dipped well below 200 to start the year, which is very uncharacteristic of a player of his caliber and with his ability as a hitter to see the average, go that low. However, he did have a very quick turnaround as his average quickly climbed above the 300 mark within the next few games. Now, Anderson had a huge year last year, and to the life of me, I don't understand how he didn't make the All-Star team. He led the league with a .335 batting average and also had career highs in hits with 167 and in doubles with 32. So the guy can clearly hit without question. His performance in September has been the best baseball he's played all season long. In the first 14 games of the month of September, he was only hitless in 2 of them. And with his team just recently clinching their first playoff spot since 2008, I think we will hear a lot more about Tim Anderson. And honestly, for a guy that is, one of the best, or is on one of the best teams in baseball this year, it's shocking we don't hear a ton about him. We definitely do hear about him, not saying we never hear about him, but I think that Jose Abreu gets a lot of the attention, and rightfully so, but I think that Anderson will start to gain more and more attention with them being in the playoffs and everyone being able to watch their games. They'll see how good Anderson really is. He definitely had a rocky start to the season, but he finally got in a rhythm, and he hasn't looked back since, and I think that this White Sox team is going to really benefit from having him on, their team and in their lineup, because he's got a great bat, and going into these playoffs, that's going to be crucial for their team. Next guy that I want to mention from the LA Angels, Anthony Rendon. Now, Rendon's season has been a little bit more of a struggle than Anderson's, mainly because Rendon didn't catch fire until the latter part of August. Rendon started the season hitting .333 after the first game. So the first game in an Angels uniform, off to a great start, but that quickly dropped to below, his average dropped below 200 as he was 200 or below all the way up until the middle part of August when he finally broke through that barrier and was able to hit higher than 200. He also only had 4 home runs through the first 15 games or so, which again isn't awful considering that the season was going to be shortened anyways. But for a guy who hit 34 homers last year and hit .319 on the year, I mean, he had a career season in Washington. He definitely did not start his career with the Angels on the right foot at all. But he did turn things around, thanks in part to a 14-game hitting streak right in the middle of August. And all of a sudden, his average jumped from well below 200 to now batting, .326 at that point. So an over 100-point increase. That is very impressive, and that's really hard to do in the MLB. He's now started to flatten out a little bit as he went into September hitting a little below 300. He's now hitting .277, but he was able to bring the OPS up above 1,000 after having his OPS drop to as low as .569. So the fact that that is back up to above, his OPS is back up above 900, that's a great sign for him and the Angels moving forward because he will be in LA for quite some time, signing a huge contract with them, one of the biggest offseason acquisitions by any team. And although this team will not make the playoffs, they're going to really love having Rendon in the City of Angels because he can hit, and although he showed he can really slump, he has also shown he can turn things around, and he is capable of turning up the notch a little bit and is able to improve his play. That's a great sign that he can bring himself out of a slump and make a quick turnaround, no question about it. He's been a really nice bright spot for the Angels, and who knows, in the next 2 or 3 years, if they add the certain players and the certain pieces that they need to, he could be, the main focal point, him and Trout on this Angels team. We could see them possibly in the postseason. I really do think that. Next guy, another guy from the Chicago White Sox, Jose Abreu. Abreu has had an up-and-down year, starting off pretty rough, and then turned it around some, and then he was somewhat mediocre for a good part of August, but then as of recently, he has been going off from the plate. Through the first 4 games, he was hitting no higher than .235, and for a back-to-back All-Star the last 2 seasons, to enter the season hitting, near the Mendoza line, that's never a good way to get the season started. He was able to bring it up a little bit to as high as .295 in early August before it dipped back down to under .250, so a lot of up and down, a very hot and cold year for Jose Abreu, but then the latter part of August happened, and he has been on an absolute tear ever since. His average has been well above 300 since about August 18th, and the OPS has been through the roof as well, which has explained why he leads the MLB in RBIs this year with 51, and he leads the MLB with 68 hits, and with at-bats as well, as he has 205 at-bats. So a guy that is clearly doing a lot of damage from the plate, and again, if you think about it, they've got Tim Anderson, who I just mentioned, and they've got Jose Abreu, they've got Eloy Jimenez, and Luis Robert. He's been struggling a little bit lately, but everybody's saying that he is a very good baseball player. But this White Sox team is dangerous. Abreu is a very vital part to this White Sox lineup. His batting average is actually a career high for him right now, as he's sitting right at .332, and the OPS is above 1,000 for the first time in his career as well. And with playoffs nearing, and like I mentioned, the White Sox clinching a playoff spot, we're going to see much more of Abreu in the fall time. And to be honest with you, I wouldn't be shocked if we saw the Chicago team make a deep run into the playoffs. They have hitting, they have pitching, and with Abreu turning his season around completely and Tim Anderson flipping the switch on his 2020 campaign as well, it is clear that this White Sox team is a dangerous team, and they will make a lot of noise in October. Again, I'm very excited to see, how they're going to, perform in October, and I'm going to get into them in my next segment, but and we'll hear a little bit more about them. But having those 2 guys right there, and the fact that they've turned their seasons around at the right time, at the right moment, that's even bigger for them. Next guy from the Boston Red Sox, who has been struggling so bad this year, but he's finally picked it up, Rafael Devers. Now, this is a player who, like Rendon, really struggled this year, and I mean really struggled. Devers started the season off colder than ever, hitting below 200 for the entire first part of the season, and really much into August as well. He was really having a hard time from the plate. Right around August 18th is when things started to pick up for Devers, as he had back-to-back 3-hit games that jumped his average from 207 up to 231. So a nice, 20, 30-point increase right there. He gradually built it up to 248 by the end of August, and in September he has, seen a good bit of success. Thanks in part to a 10-game hitting streak in the month of September, Devers has seen his average climb to above 290, which is a huge accomplishment considering the slugging third baseman was hovering around 170 for much of the first half of the year. I would have to say he is definitely one of the most improved players on this list, and really in all of baseball. He is a dangerous hitter, as we saw last year when he hit .311 in just his third year in the league. I mean, think about that. He was 22 years old last year, hitting .311 in the MLB as a 22-year-old. He's got such a bright future ahead of him. I know I've raved about him before on the show, and I'm going to continue to rave about him even though I am not a Red Sox fan at all. I think that Devers is a very good player who's going to be around for quite some time, and, we're not going to stop hearing about him. He's going to be a name that's going to stick around, and, Fernando Tatis is a player that we hear a lot about this year, especially with, again, how young he is and how good he's been, performing. But we cannot forget about Rafael Devers. And at 23 years old, Devers has the potential down the road to be one of the better hitters in baseball without question. But his fielding is something he needs to work on significantly. He's first in the league in errors this year, and he finished in the top 10 each of the last 3 years for most errors committed by a third baseman. So someone the Sox are going to really have to work on, with him and his glove abilities, because he's everything and more going for him at the plate. I mean, you definitely can tell that the swing is there. He's got the ability to hit. It's just really figuring out the fielding aspect. And the fact that he is, this young and he was able to pull himself out of a slump like he did, I mean, that's a great sign moving forward in his career. A very mature thing to do for somebody that is 23. And, when things get tough, Devers is able to find a way out and turn things around. It might take some time, but he's able to pick up the level of play. So don't be shocked if, come end of September, he hits above 300 and finishes with a higher than 300 average, which would be an even more incredible turnaround of a season for him. And unfortunately, obviously the Red Sox are not going to make the playoffs this year, but coming down the road and looking into, kind of the, looking into the future a little bit, we're going to start seeing Devers and the Red Sox in the postseason and much more in the coming years. I mean, I think that they're just, building for the future. They're waiting to strike, and they're going to wait for their perfect opportunity. And, when that does come, I genuinely do believe that Rafael Devers will be ready for that. Next guy from the San Diego Padres, and again, this is going to be a shock that I mention him, Manny Machado. I mean, he's another example of someone who has, who was struggling big time in the earlier part of the year, and within the last few weeks, he has figured it out and started to produce from the plate. Machado was hitting an average 250 from the plate to start the season, but then the average started dropping game after game after game. His average dipped as low as 193 in the beginning to middle part of August, right around that first part of the month, and I remember taking a look at his numbers and being absolutely shocked at how poorly he was hitting, and yet the Padres were still one of the top teams all year long, which speaks to the depth and supporting cast they have, around not only Machado, but Tatis as well. Once the middle of August hit, Machado was able to find his groove a little bit, climbing the average, back up into the 200s, but then took another dive a few games later where it was approaching below the 200 mark. So again, another guy like Devers, very up and down, very roller coaster type beginning of the season, very hot and cold year for Machado to say the least, but he wasn't finished putting on a show. I mean, the latter part of August is where things turned around for him as his average skyrocketed to over 300 for the first time all year long. He kept that momentum going into September, where his average did take a little bit of a dip, going just below 300. Right now, 295 at the lowest in September, so that was the lowest it went. So, I mean, again, if you're the lowest you're going for your batting average in that month is 295, that's pretty good. Any way you look at it, that is very good. But he is now, the leader in average on his team. And not to mention, he has 14 homers and 41 RBIs in this shortened season. So he is clearly producing the way he should have been all along. And I can only imagine how good the Padres would have been earlier in the year if Machado had been playing like he is now. They could have been in first place for all we know. Machado has definitely turned this season around and is by far one of the more improved players in just this season. I'm really excited to watch him and the Padres play in this postseason coming up here in, a couple weeks, really. He's going to be a huge, huge part of their success. I really do think that, especially in this postseason. And again, it's about these guys picking up, momentum at the right time. These guys are starting to play much better baseball. The first half of the year, not so great. And now they're starting to improve and keep on improving, and they're on a gradual incline up towards, where they need to be. I mean, this is going to be an interesting postseason for sure. Next guy from the Atlanta Braves, and again, another guy that, might be a shock, Freddie Freeman. I mean, my last player on this list, I wouldn't say struggled like some of the other guys on this list, but Freeman still had his fair share of difficulties in the early part of the season. He started the year off with a hitless game, so right there he was in a little bit of a hole to begin. His average then went up and down for most of the first 8 to 10 games, with it dropping to as low as 125 and going as high as 316, so very opposite ends of the hitting spectrum in that regard. His OPS did something similar, where it went from as low as 375, which is alarmingly low for someone who is as talented as Freeman is, to as high as a 1.059 OPS. And again, if you've got an OPS that is as good as, a batting average like Freddie Freeman did, that's a little alarming. And I actually made the joke the other day, if there's a baseball team out there, or really any team that has a winning percentage that would be considered a really good batting average, that's, again, another alarming sign. So, the first part of August was also very up and down for him as the average dropped and rose through the first 9 games of the month. Then it finally clicked for Freeman, and he hasn't looked back yet. Someone whose year was definitely a struggle to begin with, but unlike some of these other guys on the list, he quickly turned things around, and he never, struggled again. The average started to ascend into the middle of August, and by the end of the first full month of the baseball season, Freeman was above 300, hitting as high as 314 in the last day of August. September has been a month for Freeman, as he has shown he is one of the hottest hitters in all of baseball right now, with his average climbing up, even higher after it eclipsed 314, and it has soared to 352, where he currently leads the NL in average. So going from hitting almost 100 to start the year and having an OPS as low as 375 to now hitting over 350 and over an 1100 OPS, I mean, talk about a tale of 2 seasons for Freeman. He really experienced a big turnaround in this season and is going to head into the playoffs as one of the best hitters in baseball right now. And for opponents that will face off against the Braves, that could spell trouble in the postseason. I really do think that, Freeman has been consistently one of the best hitters in the NL and really in the entire MLB in the last 5 to 7 years or so. So him having, this quick uptick at the right time, that is perfect for the Braves. And a lot of these players started the season really slow, and we can see from this list it has, it was some star-studded players. Other stars have really struggled the whole year and are continuing to trend today. I mean, that trend is continuing on today. Guys like Bellinger and Yelich are both still struggling after having a poor start to their 2020 year. Cody Bellinger has not been able to figure it out. I don't think his average has eclipsed higher than 250, and Christian Yelich is still struggling to get out of, below the Mendoza area. I mean, I think he's in the same kind of general area that Cody Bellinger is. It has not picked up in the way it has for these guys on this list, though. So, again, Bellinger and Yelich might need to take in the last, what do we have, week or so left of the season, might be a little bit too late, but they need to take a little page out of some of these guys' playbook and try and figure out how they were able to turn their season around. And although some of the players I mentioned have turned their season around better than others, they all have improved greatly to the point where it was pretty clear at the beginning of the year that this might be a tough season for them. But they were able to make a quick turnaround and get back to their normal selves. And again, I'm really excited to see some of these guys perform in the postseason, because I think we're going to start to really see the full potential and the full ability that a lot of these players have, especially come postseason. That's really where, some of this talent really starts to shine through. So that will close things out here for us in our second segment here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Thanks again for tuning in. Coming up after the commercial break, I'll share which teams will be the most dangerous in the playoffs and who will come into the month of October with a lot of momentum from this season. Folks, it's been a lot of fun so far, but we got a lot more to go. So don't change that channel. We will be right back here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be, visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Great to have you all here still with me today. Jack Ridenauer again, and we just finished up discussing the most improved players in the MLB this season, some star-studded players who have really turned their season around in a matter of weeks. I want to now get into which teams I could see being the most dangerous in the playoffs this year and which ball clubs could do a lot of damage in October. There have been a lot of great teams this year, but a lot of surprises as to who has been playing well. Some teams who, if you told me before the year started were going to be this good, I probably would have said you were crazy. But here we are, less than 10 games to play until playoffs, and some of these teams are way better than what people had envisioned this year, including myself. So the first team that I have to make note of, and I think that is going to be very good, and I think is going to do a lot of damage, the Tampa Bay Rays. And if you were to tell me about 5 to 6 months ago that we would see the Rays sitting in the driver's seat of the AL East and the Yankees would not be in the first place, would not be the first place team, I would have no question called you crazy, without a doubt. But we now see, ourselves less than, 10 games to go, and the Rays have not only remained in the first place spot, but they have also clinched a playoff spot. They have had some solid help from a couple of guys on the team hitting-wise. Second baseman Brandon Lau has been, fairly consistent, batting .262 with a .573 slugging percentage, a .933 OPS. He's got 13 homers and 32 RBIs, which both lead the team. Willy Adames has also been big for them in certain spots this year, so their middle infield has been pretty solid across the board for the most part. But after that, a lot of the guys on the team haven't been much of anything this year. I mean, Ji-Man Choi is only hitting .230 with a .741 OPS, which is unusual for a power guy in this lineup, especially with him coming off back-to-back 800-plus OPS years. But somehow, someway, the Rays have found themselves in a very comfortable spot for the first-place position. They've also had some big-time help from their pitching staff, with Blake Snell having a 4-1 record. He's got a 3.05 ERA, and Tyler Glasnow has got a 3-1 record with 73 Ks, which leads the team, and they've been doing a very nice job limiting teams to not very many runs, while also striking out a high volume of guys, with both Glasnow and Snell being 1 and 2 in team strikeouts. If they can continue to get the help they've received from their pitching staff and this lineup starts to heat up even more, this is going to be a scary playoff team. And they've had their way with the Yankees this year. I mean, they're 7 and 2 against the Bronx Bombers. And if a team is showing its dominance like that over a team like the Yankees, a very established organization that has clearly made its mark in the AL East, I mean, whoever has to play them in the postseason is going to be in for a rude awakening. So whoever has to take on the Tampa Bay Rays, I feel really bad for you. Next team, and this is not going to come as a shock because, I mean, they've been unbelievable this year, the San Diego Padres. I mean, how could you not say the Padres are going to be dangerous this year? They have some of the best hitting and pitching in the entire league, and the additions they made at the trade deadline just strengthened their roster even more. When you have Fernando Tatis Jr. as your leader and best overall player, it's very easy to have so much success. But then you throw in guys like Jake Cronenworth. I mean, he's got a .310 batting average, 900 OPS. He's got 20 RBIs. Will Myers has been playing out of his mind this year, batting .298 with a .626 slugging percentage, leads the team in slugging percentage, and a .984 OPS. Not to mention he's got 13 homers and 35 RBIs. And this guy, not sure if anyone is aware of him, someone named Manny Machado. I mean, he's been putting on a show recently, completely turning this season around in more ways than one. Like I mentioned in the last segment, he's got a .314 batting average, 970 OPS, 14 homers, and a staggering 41 RBIs. Him and Tatis are the only guys on the Padres with 40 or more RBIs. So this team is beyond dangerous, and they are a force to be reckoned with. The middle of their lineup is a doozy to get through for any starting pitchers who are facing off against them, with their 3, 4, and 5 hitters combining for over 100 RBIs and over 30 home runs. That's absurd. Those three guys have almost as many home runs as the Pirates do as an entire team. Not to mention, they added Austin Nola, who's a solid hitter. Although he hasn't been hitting well since he came to San Diego, he still has the potential. And Mitch Moreland, who has also struggled, but before he arrived in San Diego, he was hitting above 300 with over an 1,100 OPS. And let's not forget about the pitching, with Zach Davies putting on a dominating season with a 7-3 record and a 2.69 ERA and 55 Ks. Dinelson Lamet, who I think could make a case for the Cy Young this year, has a team-high 79 Ks and a 2.12 ERA in their rotation. I'm a big Lamet fan. I think that he's very, very good, and I think that he's got a very, very bright future ahead of him, and we're going to hear a lot more about him in the years to come. He's also very young. He hasn't even approached 30 yet, so he's got a bright future ahead of him. They also added Trevor Rosenthal to the mix at the deadline, and he's been great for this team. I mean, he's with 8 Ks in 5 appearances. In each of those appearances, he's pitched only 1 inning. So in 5 innings so far for the Padres, he's got 8 Ks and a 3.07 ERA or lower in each appearance on the mound. The guy's going to be a crucial piece to their success because having relief pitching that can come in and hold teams in those 7 through 9 innings will be essential to them going far into this playoff picture and really trying to leave their mark in the postseason. They also added Mike Clevenger as well at the deadline, which will help them out a ton too, as he's registered 2 wins in 3 starts for the Padres, and 2 of the 3 outings he had 7 or more Ks and has kept the ERA no higher than 3.74. So the addition they made at the deadline, I mean, all of them are going to be, definitely great, and they're going to pay dividends for them. And they finish out with a semi-easy schedule, with their final few series being against the Mariners, Angels, and Giants, all 500 or below teams. I mean, if the Giants are, still hovering around that 500 mark. But again, there's none of those teams are division leaders in any sort of the sense at all. So a walk in the park, assumingly, for the Padres, and a great way to usher themselves into the playoffs. It'll be very interesting to see how they close out the season, if they start resting anybody, and if they do, will that affect anything going forward? I really don't think so, because this Padres team, they're going to be a force to be reckoned with. And I know it's a little early to say this, but I could see them in the World Series. I definitely, after the trade deadline moves that they made, it's pretty clear that they're going all in on this year. Next team, the Chicago White Sox. I mean, this team next to the Padres, I think will make the biggest noise in the playoffs, to the point where I wouldn't be shocked if they made the World Series also. So again, a Padres-White Sox World Series, I mean, that would just make this 2020 season even weirder than it already is. A team that has fought tooth and nail all year long, and they clawed their way to the top of the AL Central and have now found themselves in the first overall spot in the AL playoffs. With over 30 wins this year, this White Sox team has had a lot of help from a number of guys like Tim Anderson and Jose Abreu, who we just heard about in the last segment, but they've also had help from guys like Eloy Jimenez. I mean, he's been hitting over 300 with 13 homers. He's got 38 RBIs, not to mention a 917 OPS, and as a team, they are one of the best hitting teams overall, with the second highest team batting average this season in the league, the 5th most home runs as a team with 83 in counting, the 4th highest slugging percentage as a whole, and the 6th highest team OPS. So clearly not only a great just overall hitting team, but a great power hitting team. They have a tough final few series before they head into the playoffs with Cleveland, with Cleveland first off, and then their city rival, the Cubs, being the last 2 teams they face. So this could pose to be an interesting finish for the White Sox. Although they have a tough road ahead, before October, I don't see it hindering anything regarding their performance for the playoffs, because I think they will be ready to go, and they are going to have a really solid performance in the postseason. If the season were to end today, the White Sox would be facing the Blue Jays in the first round of the playoffs, they have not played against them this year at all due to the realignment in the league. So it will be a new matchup for Chicago, which I think will be a cakewalk for them into the next round. Now, they could take on either the Twins or the Yankees in the next round, again, if the playoffs were to end today. And, with the Twins being an in-division rival, that would make things very interesting for the playoffs, which they are an even 5-5 against this season. So a team they match up well with. It'll be interesting to see, how the series would play out if it does happen. But regardless, this White Sox team, they're going to be incredible to watch in the playoffs. Next team, their city rival and their in-city neighbor, Chicago Cubs. Why is no one talking about the Cubs? They've been great all year, and it pains me to say that as a Brewers fan, but they have been absolutely rolling in the NL this season. I will say, having the Padres in the same league probably doesn't help their cause for the attention that they, should receive, mainly because the Padres have been in every single headline this year, and the Central in the NL has been absolutely atrocious. But the Cubs have been playing great all year long. Although they have a middle-of-the-road team in terms of combining, or combined hitting this year, they have still found themselves in the better half of the 30-win mark this season. And yes, their division being so bad does help them out a bit. And the fact that, the only team this year that probably could have given them any sort of a run at the division title, the Cardinals, were out of baseball for 2 weeks with COVID. So it does help their cause a little bit more there also. However, where they have been struggling hitting-wise, they've made up for it, pitching-wise, because they have the 8th best team ERA in the league, and the 11th most strikeouts in the league as well. Looking at their lineup, there aren't many hitters who stand out that have been having stellar years. I mean, Jason Hayward had the highest batting average, in the lineup of guys that played consistently with a 287 clip, a 927 OPS. Ian Happ has the highest OPS in the lineup with a 941 clip. Javier Baez, I mean, he's been average at the plate, and Wilson Contreras has also been semi-average. But come playoffs, I think we will see a different Cubs team, and a team that is capable of, taking down top-tier teams and can really make a run in the playoffs. I've actually had this conversation with many friends about, who we could see making a big-time run in the playoffs, and they finish, with them, if they were to finish the season with, on a strong note and really, go into the playoffs with a lot of momentum, I would not be shocked if they went very far. I mean, I've got a couple friends that really believe that they could see this Cubs team go into the NLCS this year. They finished the season with one series against the Pirates, which shouldn't be an issue for them, and then one against the White Sox and one against the Twins. The White Sox have had their number this year, going 2-1 against the Cubs, but they have, won the 2 games they played against the Indians. So they can play with the best of them, no question. I mean, they proved it right there. Once we hit playoff time, it'll be interesting to see how dominant this team is, but I am hopeful that the Cubs are going to be a scary team this year in the playoffs. Next team, the LA Dodgers. I mean, how could you not put this team on the list, right? They've been stellar all year long. They've been one of the top hitting and pitching teams all season long, and they've got guys who can do a lot for them, and they've got so much depth. Next to the Padres, I think that they've got the most depth in the NL, without question. With Mookie Betts and Corey Seager both having the best years on the Dodgers, as they are both hitting above 300 on the year, they've also had a lot of help from their young budding catcher, Will Smith, who's also been hitting above 300 and has the highest OPS on the team with a 1.012 OPS. And Will Smith, again, we just talked about most improved players. I mean, I would give him honorable mention. About a couple weeks ago, he was hitting around 250, and all of a sudden, he's jumped up 50 points in batting average. They've got great pitching with Kershaw being healthy. That is always a great sign moving into the playoffs, but can he stay healthy? That's the big question. He's got a 2.28 ERA on the year and a 5-2 record, and if he can keep, his health in check and he can be there for his team for the entirety of the playoffs, this is a very scary team. I mean, a lot of people talk about how Clayton Kershaw might be washed up and he might not have it anymore, but every time the guy goes out and he pitches and he's healthy, it's always a positive result. And he still has a lot left in the tank. I think that if you take away some of the injuries he's had in his career, I think it would be a totally different conversation we would be having about Kershaw. But with him being healthy and getting into the playoffs, and this is probably the healthiest he's been in quite some time, going into the playoffs, that's a really good sign for LA. They also have another young star in Dustin May, who has a 2.68 ERA, and he's notched 34 Ks. And with Julio Urias having a 3-0 record and 40 Ks, this is a team that is very well balanced. So it's no shock that they are going to be great in the playoffs. What I am looking forward to, which I could see as a potential matchup if things were to, play out the way everyone thinks they will, the Dodgers and the Padres could meet up in the second round of the playoffs. Again, a lot of things would have to, obviously, if the season were to end today, that would kind of be the second round matchup if both teams were to get out of that first round, and it would make for an incredible series. Both teams evenly matched with their hitting and pitching. They can do a lot of damage. I think that would be, a battle that is, high scoring, but you also will see some awesome pitching matchups in between those teams as well. Regardless, if you don't think this Dodgers team is going to make an impact in the playoffs, well, then you are way off, because this could be one of the most, if not the most, dangerous teams in the playoffs this season, and they're hungry. I mean, they're really, I think, they kind of have looked at the last couple years. I definitely think that they feel robbed, and I've mentioned this many times with everything that had gone on with the Astros. I think that they definitely feel cheated a little bit, which they should, and I think that's going to add fuel to the fire. I think that's going to really, ignite something underneath them and really try to, bring out the best in them, and I think that we're going to have, the Dodgers team that we have seen the last couple years. This might be a team that's even better than the team we've seen the last couple years. I mean, they have been very deep the entire time, but I think that now they're at their deepest, really. I mean, Max Muncy, he's still there. Justin Turner. I mean, they've got a lot of great pieces. They've got great relief pitching with Kenley Jansen. I mean, he's a fantastic closer, one of the best closers in baseball. So they've got a really, bright next month or so ahead of them if they can keep people healthy. If Kershaw can't be healthy and, guys start struggling, it might be a little bit of a long playoffs for the Dodgers. Last team that I have to mention, and last but never least, the Oakland A's. And the A's have had, a lot going for them in this year's postseason, mainly because this is one of their most impressive years they've had in recent memory. They have a little bit of a hard time in the month of September, but in August they were virtually untouchable as a team. This A's team, similar to how the Cubs are, they don't have the best team batting average or the best team OPS, but where they are good is getting guys on base and being able to set other hitters up well to drive them in. And the pitching has been phenomenal, as they have the fourth highest team ERA in the league with a 3.58 team ERA. But what is really mind-blowing is not one guy is hitting above 250 on their team or has higher than a 900 OPS. So it is a head-scratcher as to how, they've been good, this good so far all year long. And similar to, the Cubs, their division is very weak. And with the next, best team being the Astros, who I think is not that great of a team this year. I mean, it's pretty evident that it was a huge drop-off from last year. It's going to be interesting to see how, the A's and the Cubs really move forward into the playoffs. And the A's, they have only one tough series left this season against the Dodgers, who they have yet to face off against this year, and then a series against the Giants and one against the Mariners, who they've both played well against this season. So my biggest question going into the postseason will be, can the hitting stay up to par with the other teams in the league? We will have to see, but I do feel the way, the A's have been playing, it will carry them far into the playoffs. I don't think that they are as dominant as some other teams in the league who will make the playoffs, but I know for a fact that they will be a team to watch come October. Now, I will say out of all the teams on this league, the Cubs and the A's really, and again, I think that they'll be dangerous regardless, but it's going to be interesting to see how they play against other teams in the postseason, other very good teams, because, these two teams, they haven't really had a whole lot of competition or a whole lot of, formidable opponents to go up against, because their divisions have, been arguably two of the worst divisions in baseball all year long. The AL West, after the A's and the Astros, it drops off significantly. Now, the Mariners have started to pick up the pace a little bit, but the Rangers, they've been bad. The Angels, they've been bad. And the NL Central is, in my opinion, the worst division in baseball. They at one point did not have one team above 500. Now, that was when the Cardinals were not playing, and, they had played, 7 games up until that point. So, again, a little bit of a skewed statistic there, but if you're a team that has not really had a whole lot of preparation against other top tier teams in the league, I can see how it would be difficult to really try and bring out the best baseball you can and really try and compete with teams that have, been able to go toe-to-toe with some of the better teams in baseball. Look at the Dodgers and the Padres. They've had practice all year long going up against some, very formidable opponents. Same thing with the Twins, the Indians, the White Sox. They've been going, it's been, a slugfest against those three teams in that AL Central, which is arguably next to the NL West, the best two divisions in baseball, which is kind of ironic. The opposites, the AL West and the NL Central are the worst, while the AL Central and the NL West are the best. So, again, very ironic, but, it's definitely going to be a fun postseason, and one that is very unique considering the playoffs will be played in off-sites. As we know, San Diego and LA are going to be home to the AL playoffs, and Houston and Arlington are home to the NL playoffs. So it will look, different for sure, but I still expect a really fun series of games during this year's playoffs. Not to mention, I'm just excited for some playoff baseball. I don't know about anybody else out there, but playoff baseball is, I think, one of the most underrated things in all of sports because, again, people don't really, I think, give baseball the credit that they should. A extra inning or a bottom nine situation in a postseason game, usually when there are fans, it's one of the most, on the edge of your seat things that you will watch in sports, in my personal opinion, especially with just how much anticipation is built up in baseball. But, again, it's going to be a little bit different this year with no fans. I think regardless, we're still going to have a lot of great baseball to watch. So that'll do it for this segment, folks. Thanks for sticking around. Stay right there. We will be right back after this commercial break for the final segment today, where I will get into a very popular discussion about one of the best players of all time, Pete Rose, and whether or not he will ever make the Hall of Fame. Don't go anywhere, everyone, because we have one last segment here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
Want to know the latest in soccer? Then listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast. From MLS, the World Cup, and the Premier League, we've got you covered. The latest updates, the hottest matches, and news on the league's top players. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast.
David Beckham scores the goal to take England all the way to the World Cup final.
Listen now.
Hey everyone, and welcome back for the final segment here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Jack Ridenauer still with you, and in the last segment, I jumped into the topic of which teams will be the most dominant in the playoffs this year, and who we could actually, and all should keep an eye out for come October. I want to wrap up today talking about the likelihood and probability of whether or not Pete Rose should be or will be in the Hall of Fame, which has been a very highly debated topic over the years. And for anybody out there that does not know, Pete Rose is arguably one of the greatest baseball players ever. He was pretty much, kind of the hustle man before, hustle players was really a thing, right? I mean, he was always the guy that was stretching a single into a double. He played every single play and every single at-bat whenever he was on the base path. He played with 150% every single time. Now, a little backstory into why he's banned from the MLB or from the Hall of Fame and everything. He played for over 20 years in the MLB, and as his career went on and he started to age a little bit, he eventually converted to a player manager. And at the time, back in the 70s and 80s, player manager was kind of a thing, obviously not anymore, but it was something that, a guy could, be the manager, but he could also suit up when he wanted to. And he was, he had played for the Reds for, majority of his career, and then he wound up being, the player manager for the Reds. So what happened is that, I think it was in 1989, there was a bunch of reports that came out about and a bunch of speculation that he had been gambling on games. And they did an investigation. They came out with a report basically saying that he had bet on games that involved his team. And again, he bet on his team to win. He was even quoted in, I think, an interview later on in life saying, that he always bet on his team to win. I mean, he loved his team, he loved his guys, and he had complete and utter faith in them to win. But he bet on baseball at the time in sports where that was not allowed, and as a result, he took basically kind of a he kind of took I don't want to say like a deal, because I mean he didn't go to like jail or anything like that, but he basically accepted that he would be banned from baseball for life. But he did not know that ban would carry through into him making the Hall of Fame and getting into the Hall of Fame. And this has been a highly debated topic for, many years. And this is something that I've talked about with many people about, whether or not he should be in the Hall of Fame. The guy's a 17-time All-Star, okay? He played for 23 years in the MLB. If you're a 17-time All-Star out of 23 years, there's not many guys anymore, I feel. Again, we probably will see as time goes on that there will be people and players that are like that. But at the time in which he was playing, I mean, that was very hard to do. And to be that good for 17 years out of the 23 you played, I don't know how you don't acknowledge that in any sort of fashion. Putting aside the stuff off the field, you have to give credit where credit is due to somebody who worked hard and gave everything he did to the game of baseball. He's a 3-time batting champion. He was an MVP. He was a 3-time World Series champion. He won the World Series MVP. Tons of accolades. Not to mention, I'm going to just rattle off some of these records he has. He holds the record for most hits in a career with 4,256, which arguably will never be touched. I mean, there's a lot of people that talk about, records that will never be touched and never be broken. He's got one right there, Cy Young's win record at 511, I believe it is. That will probably never be touched. I mean, there's a lot of records that will, maybe never be touched. And I know that probably people used to think that about Babe Ruth's record, and then people probably thought about that for Hank Aaron when he broke that record, and now Barry Bonds has the home run record. And again, that's a whole nother different, conversation for another day. But I mean, he's still having 4,200 career hits in a season. In a career, that is mind-boggling. And again, there's really, I don't think anybody that could even come close to that number in these days. He also has the career number in singles for 3,215 for an entire career, games played with 3,562, career at-bats with 14,053, and plate appearances with 15,890. So, and again, I mean, the list goes on. I mean, he had numerous other records, but those are, I guess, the ones that, really stood out to me and were kind of the ones that people would, want to hear and pay attention to. I mean, right there, the hit king. That's what they call him. He's the hit king. And it's unfortunate that he got caught gambling and that whole entire situation, kind of unraveled in front of him. And it's really haunted him ever since. And I was reading about him, and I was reading about, what he does today in his life. He still gambles, but it's now legal. Sports gambling has become legal. And unfortunately, in 2015, he tried to get reinstated by the MLB. Rob Manfred rejected the reinstatement because, again, they did an investigation, and if they found that he was still betting on baseball, but he was living in Las Vegas. He was living in the gambling capital, the casino capital of our country. So no wonder he's going to gamble. And yes, he did go to rehab for his gambling addiction after this came out and everything. But my thing is this, right? If you're going to continue to punish somebody for something that they did so many years ago, especially now that is a legal thing, okay? Again, sports gambling is legal. You're able to do that now. And at the time, again, unfortunately, it was not able to be done, and you were not able to do it. And he, again, made a mistake, rightfully so. He should be punished. But to leave somebody out of the Hall of Fame that had that big of an impact on baseball, that has... he lives in baseball lore to this day, and he's not able to make it to Cooperstown. That's ridiculous. And what's even more ridiculous, and I was reading this on somewhere on the internet, he still goes to Cooperstown. They ask him, the Hall of Fame asks him to come and do, different things here and there, but he's not allowed to be enshrined. He's not allowed to be in. And I bring up this point. Okay, and again, another thing, there's a bunch of other things in his career he did. He had a 44-game hitting streak, which in this day and age, you don't see that at all with the power pitching that there is. A high strikeout, high swinging strike, a percentage that a lot of hitters, have these days because it's mostly home run driven and not so much hit driven and not so much small ball baseball. And he's also, and this is another fun fact, he's fifth in Reds history with managerial wins. He had a 426 and 388 managerial record as the Reds manager. That is impressive. Not only could he play, but he could also coach. So that is another thing to, you have to tip your hat off to him. And I bring this point up because of this, okay? A lot of people argue, and I have this conversation with a very good friend of mine. He's very, very adamant that steroid users should be in the Hall of Fame because he argues that it was, at the time of the sport, that was a very popular thing to do. But if it's a popular thing to do, wouldn't you think that there wouldn't be any sort of ramifications or punishment for guys that were doing it? If it was an okay thing and a popular thing, well, okay, then, there shouldn't be any issues. It should be A-okay, and there shouldn't be any sort of, sanctions, any sort of ramifications. But as we know, all of those reports that came out in the middle of the 2000s, Roger Clemens was, implicated in a lot of stuff, Andy Pettitte, Alex Rodriguez, the list goes, Barry Bonds, the list goes on and on and on. And if people are going to say, okay, yeah, that's fine, have the steroid users come in, but you're not going to let Pete Rose in, I think that is completely backwards. I think that is completely defeating the purpose of what it means to be in the Hall of Fame. I think it's giving due credit to people that cheated. And and again, I'll probably have this conversation another day on the show, but I am very strongly opinionated against, steroid users being in the Hall of Fame. And if you're going to allow them to be in the Hall of Fame, then you need to at least have, some sort of asterisk by their name or put them in sort of kind of their own category in the Hall of Fame and maybe have an exhibit on them saying, this was a time and period where guys were using steroids. They were using, human growth hormones or, whatever type of substance in order to better their, overall performance as a player. Pete Rose never did any of that. He never used steroids. He never did anything, to alter his physical, biological makeup. He played the game honestly. He didn't do anything wrong besides gamble on the sport. Other than that, he didn't cheat. Okay, he wasn't somebody that was, using some sort of human growth hormone and was, belting out, 50, 60, 70 home runs, and clearly cheating, right? How can you not accept that as cheating, but then you're going to go ahead and accept that Pete Rose should not be in the Hall of Fame? And a lot of people will say, okay, well, yeah, if you're going to let the steroids guys in, you should obviously let Pete Rose in. And that is my point. If you're going to let one in, you've got to let the other in. And, obviously I would rather see, Pete Rose get in over all of the steroid guys because, I've never felt that you should give attention and give kind of, leeway to people that cheat, right? I mean, there's no point of that. That defeats the whole purpose of playing the game. Again, Pete Rose, he played the game honestly. He hustled his tail off. He played really, really hard, and he gave the sport everything he had. And to this day, I mean, he still has tried to try and get himself reinstated. He's tried to go through the different steps and everything to try and get back into the Hall of Fame. And a lot of people, and I've heard this on radio shows, TV talk shows, whatever it might be, and, some people feel like, hey, you know what, he might get inducted after he passes away, which I think would be the biggest crime in it all. You're not going to give the guy his due credit until he's no longer with us, and then you're going to say, oh, okay, now we'll let him in. You can't do that. Are you kidding me? You can't do that. And, I might, be one of few or one of many who feel this way about Pete Rose, but I've always felt that he should be in the Hall of Fame. And I've always felt very strongly about that because, my stepfather, he grew up in that time period and he watched Pete Rose, and I would just hear his stories about Pete Rose and how unbelievable of a hitter he was. And it almost seemed like every at-bat he was able to get on base. And to have that ability, again, baseball is very different in these days. Baseball is much more of a power sport as it is, back then it was a contact sport. But you can't ignore what he did. I mean, 4,000 hits, 3,000 singles, that is unbelievable. There is nobody in baseball to this day that I genuinely believe could get to that number. Very few people, if any. And we might not ever see that record broken, for years to come. And, I was actually looking at the Hall of Fame candidates for 2021. And the first three names I see, two of them are Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens. And I've always sat and wondered, why are they even allowed to be on the ballot? Why isn't there some sort of, lifetime ban against them, right? I mean, they were, career steroid users. Barry Bonds was implicated in a lot of stuff. Same thing with Roger Clemens. I mean, they had to go in front of a court, in front of a judge, and say what they did. And I mean, they literally had a court hearing about it. And you're going to go ahead and still allow them on the Hall of Fame ballot. And to the life of me, I really don't know why, Rob Manfred still feels the way, he does about, having, Pete Rose out of the Hall of Fame. I think that it's, again, doing a disservice to him. And I think that as time goes on and sports gambling continues to be more and more of a popular thing, I would not be shocked if we continue to hear, about Pete Rose and, should he be in the Hall of Fame? Well, sports gambling is everywhere now. Are you going to continue to, punish the guy for something that he did 30, 40 years ago? Whenever sports gambling gets really big, it'll probably be 30 or 40 years from that point in which he got in trouble. Are you going to continue to punish him? Because if so, I think it's going to send the wrong message to baseball players, to fans, journalists, broadcasters, everybody out there saying, hey, we've got no problem with putting guys that cheated for an entire career on the Hall of Fame ballot and allowing them to have votes to get in the Hall of Fame. And again, they're obviously going to, this has been, I think, year 9 that Roger Clemens and Barry Bonds have been on the Hall of Fame ballot, and they're still not in. And quite frankly, I could see them never being in. But the fact that they at least have a fair shake at that, and Pete Rose doesn't, and he never cheated the game of baseball, that is very infuriating for me. And I think that it again, he's still, a very prominent figure in the media. I mean, he had a TV show a couple years ago. He still stays very active. He actually, when he goes to the Hall of Fame, he will stay at a different hotel from all of the players, and people still flock the hotel. They still go there to get his autograph. And I feel like there is a lot of people out there that really want to see him in the Hall of Fame. And I can only imagine, when that day, if it does come, and I really do believe it, maybe it's 5 years from now, maybe it's 10 years from now, but with the way sports gambling is going and with the growth that it has as of right now, you're going to start to see, people ask that question in baseball. Should Pete Rose be allowed in the Hall of Fame now? Should he be given, a spot on the ballot? He's in the Cincinnati Reds Hall of Fame. He made the MLB's All-Century team. And again, how is that not adding up to a Hall of Fame recognition? Just because he did something, and again, I'm not condoning what he did. I'm not saying what he did was right. Obviously, it was not a good thing to do, okay? But Are you going to condone the guys that used, a narcotic or a substance in order to, enhance their performance and to manipulate their biological makeup in an unauthentic way? I mean, that just doesn't make any sense to me. So I think that at the end of the day, it's going to be some time before Pete Rose gets into the Hall of Fame, but I personally could see him in it. And honestly, if I, one day ever get the opportunity to vote him in, or if he does wind up on a Hall of Fame ballot, I will vote him in year after year after year. And really, I think that, we're going to start to see him. He's going to probably appeal that, or he's probably going to come back at the MLB, at Rob Manfred, and say, hey, maybe in a couple years from now, he'll say, hey, sports gambling is starting to get really popular. Can I get back into the Hall? Can I get in the Hall of Fame? Can I get my, due recognition? And if not, I mean, he's going to keep knocking at the door because, there's been many interviews, and I was reading about it, that he feels that he's been treated unfairly in some regard. And again, back to the original point, he didn't even know that his lifetime ban classified for him to not be in the Hall of Fame. So he actually mutually agreed to be banned from the Hall of Fame because initially he had, he rejected all the reports. He said that it was not him. He did not do that. And then years later, he came out saying that he did do that. There was a different, reports about how much it was. Some people said it was $10,000 he'd put down a day. Some said it was $2,000 he put down a day. But, and the other thing that, is a good point, it's a very good point, why it was not okay for him to do this is because he was a manager. And so as a result, he had the ability to really dictate how the game was going to go. It wasn't like a player where, you couldn't just get one player to dictate the entire game. I mean, for instance, the 1919 Chicago White Sox, they're called the Black Sox because, that's what, there's a series of players that threw the World Series. It takes a series of players to do that. Can't have one player do that. But as a manager, you have all the pull, all of the say, and all of, the right to do whatever, take guys out of the lineup, insert guys in the lineup, do whatever you have to do. But he always bet on his team to win. So, again, he never even tried to throw a game on purpose. He never purposefully threw a game. The main thing that he did was bet on baseball when he was a manager, when he should not have. And, again, I am never going to sit here and, say what he did was A-okay, because it wasn't. But at the same time, we have to be consistent here. If the steroid users get a fair shake, then so should Pete Rose. Because what that's telling people is that you can cheat, but you can't gamble. But yet gambling is legal today. So don't be shocked if we continue to hear his name in the news and continue to hear, some sort of appeals out of him. And, potentially, I mean, if he keeps knocking at the door, I could see maybe in 5, 10, maybe even 15 years, he eventually gets a fair shake. And when that does happen and his name lands on a Hall of Fame ballot, he will be a first balloter, no question. So I personally think he will eventually make it in. When, I don't know, but it's just a matter of time, I think, because he's very, very deserving of it. So that'll wrap it up for us here today. Thank you for listening to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I would like to ask that you please remember to subscribe to the show and write a nice review. That really helps us. We're continuing to, want to get better and improve our skills on the mic and, all the content that we bring. We want to hear feedback from you all on how we can get better and keep improving our skill set. Also, if you can please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, that would be much appreciated so we can keep you all in the loop on new, content, news, episodes, and much more coming out. Once again, everyone, thanks so much for tuning in today, and have a fantastic day.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.